Hi, Marisol. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you, Michelle.
Thank you so much for saying yes to this conversation and for saying yes to talking about grief and COVID-19 and healing and all the things I know we'll talk about today.
Yeah, I appreciate that opportunity to connect with you about it because I've always so deeply respected the work that you do.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, it's mutual. I feel the same way about you. And I would love for you to share some about who you are and what you do in the world.
hmm
Big question.
Yeah, so, well, my name is Marisol, and I live in the mountains of North Carolina. And I guess that I recently was reading, I started following this young woman who's brilliant, and her name is Clementine Morgan. And anyway, she was offering some perspectives on magic and the sacred, and she offered up this idea of trauma magic. And I feel like that resonated so deeply with what I do, which is that I am, I think, at my core, probably a survivor. And I've spent my whole life surviving in one form or another. And I think that what has been most medicinal for me has been finding ways to make magic of my trauma, to make medicine from my trauma, to um, build empathy. And so analysis, right? The hypervigilance became like deep structural analysis. You know what I mean? The fear became healing work and shadow work. And so, yeah, I feel like I've used my challenges and turned it into bodies of work that have looked like everything from activism to holding gathering spaces as a facilitator and trainer, to now also stretching more into doing more light work, that's more intentionally and explicitly grounded in ancestral sacred ritual practices. Um, and then beyond that, I don't know, where do we go from here, this moment forward? That was my life before Corona. And now I'm trying to figure out what my life will be after Corona. Because there's more coming, you know. There's an after Corona that is more struggle, more challenge, more loss. Um, because empire is falling and we've been chosen to be here for it and to participate in it. So I'm just trying to listen to what that means now about my work and who I am and what I do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so beautiful what you described about trauma magic. I've never heard that, and just hear that you heard that and then sort of thought about your work as that. And yeah, and I really appreciate what you named about there will be an after Corona, right? And it's going to include more loss, and that we've been chosen. And I totally agree with it. Like, we were chosen to be here at this time in this moment. So I'm glad you're here and glad to be on the planet with you at this time.
Me too.
For real. Yeah. I'm curious to know how your heart is, like amidst Corona and this moment. How is your heart?
Wow. More deeply broken at times, but also tender and alive, and so like grateful. um, Deep grieving. Yeah, my heart. It's a lot. You know, I think that, wow, yeah, like I haven't touched it in a little bit, and so I'm touching it now. So it's about to all just woof come, which is good because I needed this. I'm so grateful for this space to listen and connect and be witnessed. Yeah. Um, yeah, and I think it's that. I think that it's just my heart just kind of like pounds with this call to witness, deeply witness, and be with what is happening in its totality, the grief and the loss and the beauty and the fragility and the, you know, vulnerability and the resilience and the ugliness, like the evil, it's calling to be this like deeply witnessed. And it makes me think about um bell hooks, all about love, and that is love, right? Is the willingness to radically witness and be witnessed. So I guess I'm like really in love right now. And when you get really in love, it just raises up all your shadows. So I'm also practicing a lot of witnessing my own shadows as I'm witnessing the world, and feeling like this time is an incubation time to build my warrior heart as a light worker, because the road ahead is going to make real demands on these callings that I'm only now being like, oh, I have more clarity what this was calling me towards. Now I can see closer what it is. And it's pandemic, and it's climate crisis, and it's war, and it's economic collapse, and it's so terrifying and yet so deeply ancestral. So yeah, I don't know. How do you answer? It's like, how are you? I don't know, I'm okay. Like my heart's okay. My heart is okay. The other day, Michelle, I was like trying to really witness, right? And I had just dropped my son off at his father's house. So I had this space to kind of collapse, right? And it was around, I read a few articles that took my breath away about what they're learning about the virus, one, and like reactivation of the virus. And then secondly, there were all these speculations about what happens after the pandemic. And I was starting to use the analysis I have as an activist, as a racial equity, I don't know, gatherer, trainer, right? Whatever. The path that it leads us towards, and listening to the drummings of war and civil war. Oh, it hurts me right here, all up in my solar plexus. That's where I feel it. Oh God, just trying to be with that, and the possibility of, in that moment, was my own death, and that people that are dying alone in overworked emergency rooms where there's just crisis and urgency. And so like any idea that I had, even the seed of an idea that I was trying to face around my own end of life plans, and writing them down before COVID, is like, well, look, mama, nobody's gonna dress you in oils and sing songs in your ear. You may have the generosity of a stranger between patients that might hold your hand and FaceTime your family. So that this is where I was, and I was sitting on the porch, and I was trying to think about what it means to still be a light worker and a healer, even at that moment. What do you offer? What do you give that stranger? What, you know, how do you let go and be brave? And I was weeping on my porch, you know, And then I look up and it was a windy, beautiful spring day and the trees were like swaying like this, right? And I laughed. I started laughing because it is only by my own arrogance and ego that I feel so like confident that a branch wouldn't fall from the sky and knock me out in any given moment. But I carried this like arrogance that, well, that's not going to happen today, right? And now it's here and it brings everything into this stark relief that should have always been in stark relief. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what grief and loss does. Everything just is like a flash of mortality and yeah.
And I think clarity, right? In those moments, at least that's been my process with grief. Well, multiple things, right? There's like a haze, usually I feel when I'm grieving, and a fog, and a sluggishness. And I want to scream and everyone else to pay attention to the grief, right? That's that feeling. And then there's like clarity too for me about, what is real. I think that's the clarity I get in moments like this, or really any loss. And I could talk to you and listen to you forever. Because of what you bring forth and what you share and what you give and just who you are. And I heard so much in what you just named about what Vivette talks about as blood memories of ancestral trauma and what you know in your body and what is not new, right? What is familiar to you. And also, I think the question of how you are is different than how's your heart. Like no one ever asks me how my heart's doing, really. Every once in a while someone will. I have a few friends who do that. Most of the time people are asking how I am and they want me to answer from here, not from my heart. And so I appreciate you sharing so deeply from your heart. And I'm wondering if you could share some about, we're talking about grief, losses that you have experienced, or that you're acutely aware of, or both of those things, right? You can answer both. Just sharing about losses you have experienced as a result of COVID-19 and losses which you're clearly aware of, acutely aware of.
So, as of today, I have not lost any people. As of today. I've lost work, but in exchange, I've gotten so much more deeply connected to love and vulnerability. And so, yeah, COVID-19 in terms of like acute personal losses has not happened for me yet. And so I don't take that for granted. And I say that really intentionally, that that's just today. Because I know it will. I will lose people. So that was always true.
Right.
That was always true. Mm-hmm. And then, I think that there are these other kinds of waves of losses that happen that are like, they can seem so petty, but yet they're so profound too, like I was just about to get back on the dating scene. You know what I mean? And there's this feeling of how the world is profoundly tilting on its axis. that makes that such a strange thing to think about in these realities. And I feel the loss of that. I feel I'm 43 years old, and that I may turn into this like more middle-aged woman in the middle of quarantine and emerge to a world that's like in tatters, and that maybe I have one thing I will not have in my life is this like end of life partner. I've had real love, so that's beautiful. But it feels like a loss. It feels like I look at this house, and a year ago I was like, what color should I paint this room? You know, nesting. And now I look at this house and I think about how grateful I am for it as a shelter. And I also think about what else do I have to pack in my bug out bag, because we're probably going to take it to our feet pretty soon. And I shower and I'm grateful for hot water. And those feel like acute coming losses. I think about a lot about the losses to come, and a lot of times, you know, anytime I touch this fear of dying, or fear of danger, or of loss, of bankruptcy, of losing people. A few weeks ago, when this first started settling in for me, that this was happening, I ended up having like just a total break. And my body was shaking and trembling, and all the tools that I would have used in the past to outsource the regulation of that experience to another person was not available. And so I took it to ancestors, and I like crawled moaning to my table, my altar, and what came through, Michelle, was that I no longer can think as an individual. I no longer can feel as an individual, and I no longer can survive as an individual, and that I have to always try to like reconnect to the collective. So if I feel that pain, like I immediately have to like transmute to reach out and look for it in the web. As soon as I feel it. You're not alone. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? And like thrum the web and feel out, because it's not far. And then immediately tap in and be like, some of this is ancestral, coded in my DNA response to pandemic and plague. What do I know about my ancestors? Like, yeah, it's just losses visioned, losses predicted, losses that are in the fabric of my context, and the inevitability of acute losses to come into my circle of people. Mm-hmm. And I'm not alone. It's all of us. Mm-hmm. All of us. It's a lot of grief and trauma to work with when we haven't really been offered the skills and tools to do shadow work. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm.
And the universe is providing an opportunity for us to do that shadow work collective. Like, there have been moments like this before, and we're in a moment, I haven't experienced moments like this in this body in this lifetime, but in this moment, the universe and spirit are presenting, this is what I believe, an opportunity for us to look at shadow and do the shadow work we need to do to heal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy, because that's what I had been doing all of last year, was shadow work, and I was a mess for it. I was a mess for it, like laid out, which is why my business was like, because I was doing all this internal work, and I needed the isolation and the hermitage, you know. And so to come out and realize that that's what we're doing on a massive level. And to see the responses that I was spending so much time experiencing and studying and learning around like shame and defensiveness and trauma response and embodied and like all this stuff is like, oh, now I have collected all this medicine that I want to share, that I have to share. That's why I was sent out on this like vision quest to collect this medicine, just like you.
Yeah.
You were sent on a vision quest to collect medicine about grief.
Yes.
And here we are. Like now we're charged to be the brujas and like transmute that medicine. At one point, I sat in my altar room and I spent some time offering gratitude to the virus. You know, it's definitely like alien or whatever to me, but I think, you know, it also has the purpose of defending this planet. It's defending Pachamama, and it's forcing us to do shadow work. Yeah.
Yeah, and it feels, I was just reflecting on what you just said about it's forcing us to do shadow work, and I believe it is, absolutely. And it's not like an invitation. Like, I feel like, you know, for some, it depends on our identities and social location, but it's not an invitation. It's very clear the energy of this virus is like, I'm not inviting you to do the work you need to do. I am going to move you into a place where you have to do the work. And of course, I think we've seen things like this before, but I've never seen anything. I've never experienced something like this. So I know my ancestors certainly have, right? And your ancestors too.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't, like, there's no time to be invited to do this. We just have to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, right? Like, it's been done.
Yeah.
It has been done. You know what I mean? So I am a Guadalupe baby. So I was born on Dia de Guadalupe. Like La Virgen de Guadalupe is like a, you know, an iconic goddess figure in Mexico and all throughout the Americas. And so having been born under her name, one, and then having had such a victim relationship with men in my life, when I turned to the divine, even as a child, I went to La Virgen. You know, that's who I prayed to and cried to, and please make them stop bullying me. I went to La Virgen. I didn't go to the Father and the Son. That was all very outside of me, right? So of course, still to this day, I practice with this really much more politicized understanding of La Virgen and the Marian figure at all, right? That absorbed so many Black and brown goddesses through colonization and empire building. She's become this container for all this like rebellious worship of Black and brown goddesses infused in the name of this name figure of Mary, right? Covert resistance kind of place. Yeah, so I feel so much resonance with her, the feminine divine. And I was sitting one day, because my teacher, who was teaching us how to do like santeria and brujeria, how to be curanderas, how to do light work, like helping us find our path. She had scolded us, right, like months ago. Oye, and you girls, like, how long are you gonna keep burning candles and taking baths for wealth and men? And when are you gonna start burning candles for the world? Why did I teach you this? And we were like, always, because, you know, that's why she's our madrina, because sometimes we need the, you know, like, check that you're being really selfish with your light work right now. And so we had set up these altars, and you have to dedicate your altar to a particular deity or saint, or right, you encargarlo to your saint, your deity. So I did mine to La Virgen de Guadalupe. It's a simple altar, but when I was sitting in front of it, when all this started popping off, and I sat there thinking about this woman. I mean, she's a goddess, you know. But first, the story is that she was a woman. And she was a young woman who was pregnant and unpartnered, fleeing from a genocidal fascist king, seeking to kill her son across a desert, 9 months pregnant on a burro. And then she has a baby in a barn. And I think nobody tells us the story of that time in the desert.
Right.
And what happened to her. It wasn't like a montage and she like teleported to the Bethlehem. Like she was pregnant in a desert fleeing genocide. What happened to her there? What did she learn? What did she see? What were the visions? What were the lessons? Like, and then she went on to follow her revolutionary son in his quest to eliminate empire. All around the world, she's traveling with him, communing with radicals and thieves and sex workers. Like, and then she stands there when the state murders her son and continues, como una chingona, continues to stand there the whole time, knowing she's a watched, marked woman by the state, and carries her son and dresses his body in oils and delivers the ultimate message, right? Like, that's her story. And I'm like, that is my goddess. Y ahorita vamos, like now we go into the desert. We take the ride into the desert. And we learn the things that we gotta learn out here now, right? It's with this genocidal king. Yeah. And I just prayed that I have her, like, her tenderness, because she's always a tender goddess, like a sweet, you know, roses, but she's also a chingona. She was a rebel activist, like Death Tula. Mm-hmm. So hopefully I can be that too. You know?
I mean, you are that, right? That's in you.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm not saying that from I'm just saying that's for you to just name all of that, that's in you, right?
Yeah.
You know, name it in the way you just did. And to honor her in the way you just did, that's.
Oh, she's just amazing.
she's in you and part of you.
Mm-hmm. Well, all of us have those lineages. All of us have, that's how we got here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah.
We're the survivors of pandemic and genocidal kings, and you know, like we are the survivors of that. The 7th generation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And as much as like many of us have been praying and preparing for this feeling that we've been carrying of something is coming, something is happening, something must be done, you know, like that feeling that's driven so many of us. It's overwhelming too, you know. I'm scared. Like, I'm sad. Mm-hmm. I just want to paint my toes for a reason. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I want to be back out in the world. Like I want to go out in the world, and I want us to like hang out somewhere, and I want to go to work at La Esperanza and greet all my compas and get like 15 kisses before I sit down at my desk to open my email. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't know that I can't see when that happens again yet.
Right. Is there a way you're making space for yourself to grieve the things you're naming? Like we can't anticipate what's going to happen next because we don't actually know when this is going to shift, right? And all of the other losses are connection to other beings. And so when someone else is transitioning alone, as you named, in a hospital, I believe we can feel that if we're tuned in and connected and able to touch into that, right? And I actually think everyone can do that. We just haven't been conditioned to do that and see our interconnectedness. So how are you making space for your heart to grieve all of the things you've named today?
So for that, I've been turning to Yemaya. And, so Yemaya is the Orisha of ocean, the top of the ocean, the waves, and I have just been trying to practice a deep allowance for whatever comes up. Like if I'm gonna cry on a Zoom, coño, I'm gonna cry on a Zoom. If my body starts shaking, I'm like, okay, our body is trembling. There's things happening, and I think that before, when I used to try to get as fast as possible to like a right place emotionally, regulate, quick, regulate. I try not to do that right now. So I'm trying to let it be like waves, like Yemaya, and to give me, I pray for the courage to ride the waves, because they're preparing me for tsunami waves. And I need to be resourced. I need to be resourcing myself in those moments of deep grief and trauma, because this is the proactive preparation for the more that's coming. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I let it flow. I try to let it flow, and that's it. That's all I can do. I don't get better. It doesn't feel better. It just feels fluid. Yeah.
Yeah. That's how I often describe grief as the ocean or like a tidal wave. So that resonates with me so deeply, what you named. And that it's not necessarily about feeling better, getting better. It's just flowing with what is what I hear in what you're naming. And I'm wondering why you think it might be important for us as a collective to flow with this grief, right? And to acknowledge the grief that is present at this time.
Grief is another word for trauma. Trauma, it is a loss that we don't want and that we can't control, right? That's trauma. And different scales and, complexities of it. And we have been living for so long surrounded by trauma, drowning in trauma, and pushed and pushed and pushed to ignore it, to consume our way out, to produce our way out, to medicate our way out, to numb, and so as a result, it does what trauma does, which is like, it goes narcissistic. Shame is a narcissistic behavior. It goes bad. It goes, it festers and it turns toxic, right? And it has this incredible potential for us to, as survivors of trauma, to re-traumatize. And we've been doing that. for centuries. And so I think that this moment, this collective moment of like stark relief, right? Where suddenly there's this moment of we're in this together. And the caution is that that moment will shift. The who's in that container is going to shift. And we need to prepare for that. But in this moment of we're all in this together, and this connection, this hunger for connection, is a time for us to do trauma work, to understand how trauma behaves, to understand what it does to our bodies, the physiological responses, the interpersonal dynamics that emerge from it, the tools and the technology, human technology that exists in our own brain to reshape itself over and over and over. Like, we can actually change the structures of our bodies and brains in doing intentional, proactive trauma and grieving work. But when grieving work only happens in a reactionary, exiled way, what gets wired are reactionary behaviors. And what we need is, we need to be smarter than we've ever, like emotionally smarter than we've ever been. We need to be more, like our organizing and connecting needs to be more high contact relational than virtual and ideological in this coming reality. And what that means is that we're going to have to interact with each other's trauma and our own, and learn how to be witnessed in it, and then committed to healing it, and then committed to being accountable for the harm that happens in our healing path. And if we're rebuilding the after, if empire falls and we get to rebuild the after, we have to prepare ourselves to do that with a trauma lens. The image, this like, I don't know how to say it, Michelle, like I'm gonna sound so weird, but like this download came to me when everything was happening, where, like, a lot of us have been working in immigrant justice for decades. Like, there have always been children in cages, right? Like, that's always been. Of course, there's been this escalation, but for whatever momentous reason, the coming together of all the right factors, there was this explosion around the building of these detention centers, people witnessing it, and then running in the streets being like, oh my God, the children in the cages, right? We have to do something. And we were like, yeah, we've, of course, we've been trying to do something for decades. Right. And you're coming in like it's something new, right? And then it faded away. Most of those people faded away. They came in, they screamed, children in cages. They activists shook everybody around them. Why aren't you doing something? And then they left again. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's a difficult dynamic. But in that whole sort of moment, and there was a lot of optics and visuals of the detention centers, and they were showing some of the babies being returned to their parents, and their parents would be like, baby, and hugging them, and the children were non-responsive because they were traumatized and had attachment stuff. I mean, they were just in shock, right? And it was like 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds. And in that moment, I had this like, it was like a lightning rod. We're not ready for these babies. We're not ready to win right now. If they opened up all these cages and brought all of our babies back home, we're not ready for them. You know what I mean? Like, we need a plan, because they're coming back, and it's one thing when your 2-year-old doesn't hug you back, but what about when they turn 15 and they still got that attachment stuff going on? And now they're lashing out and they're fighting. They're not freezing anymore. Their trauma's fighting, right? And then are you so compassionate? Do we have tools that don't look like incarceration, exile, and execution? if they were, you know, sexually assaulted in those centers and then become predators, sexual predators from that trauma? Are we prepared? Like, I'm not prepared to sit in that circle right now. And we need to get prepared. And the only way is if we sit with the grief, trauma and grief, and really get familiar with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's the only way that the after looks beautiful and looks like liberation and love and all the things, you know, because we are definitely vulnerable to recreating what we've always known, and to bringing all, like when we're most traumatized and we're trying to build safety and security, and it's urgent, and so there's all this like, we'll get to that later, and then suddenly we've rebuilt a little mini, I don't know what, warring factions, little pockets all over. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so much struck me in what you just named, all the things you named, and one thing that really struck me is that, you know, we're not ready, and that often people who are just waking up to what is, and I want to be clear, I'm waking up to all the time, but who are just waking up, right, and being radicalized, or the consciousness is being raised in some way, and then they're stepping in to intervene as if they know what to do. Often that's a bypass to their grief. Like, they're not actually attending to what needs attention. They're coming in and saying, I want to fix it this way, and then leaving, right? And I just think that's really important for people to recognize, that we need to give this grief, trauma, anxiety, all the things connected to it, attention, so we're not re-traumatizing people. And we're not re-traumatizing people in the name of like wanting to intervene or, you know, create a different way of being. We can't actually do that unless we attend to the grief. So I appreciate that.
Well, I mean, and the other thing that is in that is that, you know, it's a way to distance myself from my collusion in the harm by positioning myself as the fixer and the savior. Who's going to hold the savior accountable? You know, because the bad guy's out there. And so then it creates a dynamic where I'm using this in order to deflect the shame I feel about my own collusion in it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there's never really any space to have the actual conversation about mutual accountability in what's happening, right? And addressing the harm and preventing it in the future. It's like it's full of this gaslighting, you know.
Yeah.
I catch myself in it. Like I often in my trainings, I joke about this dynamic and trying to model what it looks like for other people in my own life, right? And I'll joke about how often I'll get on my Mac computer or my iPhone and be like, man, fucking capitalism, right? On my iPhone.
Yeah.
Like the irony, the hypocrisy, the collusion of that moment, the pathology of that moment has to be witnessed.
Right.
Does it mean that I stop doing activism, that I stop critiquing capitalism, that I stop trying to like throw myself against the wall of it in my own life and in my own way of being? Of course not. Like I still have to do that, but I also have to witness that way of being. Otherwise I can never understand the person in the completely unplugged from it all, who's deeper in that space, lives in that space.
Yeah, I mean, you're calling us into accountability and into witnessing, as you said, the ways in which we're participating in the harm and colluding with it and benefiting from it at times, right? And that has to be acknowledged.
And that's all grieving, right? Like we're grieving that we will never be able, like, so I think that a lot of that is us trying to do good. very often, like, we're just scrambling around trying to figure out how to do the right thing, to be loved, to have meaning, to have connection, to like, right? And we just keep fucking it up because we're traumatized. And so we don't do it in the healthiest ways a lot of times. And so it's just like, if I, and me too, figure out ways to grieve, that the type of belonging and security and affirmation that I am so hungry for, and I believe that in order to get it, I must be perfect or somehow without flaw, without mistakes. If I believe that, then if I feel like that I'm not actually perfect and without flaw, or you saw that, then there's this whole wave of shame that comes before we can even grieve. Because I wasn't worthy of, right? And so like, there has to be this grieving of my own illusion of having to be a certain thing to be worthy. And because I can't do that for myself, and I'm saying like, I cannot do that for myself right now. I struggle to believe in my own intrinsic worthiness. So what does a shadow do but like project out? Well, I don't know. Are you worthy of humanity right now? And we do this on this collective level, and it becomes codified as the state that easily plays with it, like a good narcissist does, like plays with our trauma and positions it and activates it and laughs the whole time, right, knowing what they're doing. So in order for us to break free from this narcissistic state, such empire, right, we have to heal trauma. We have to grieve all the ways we didn't get loved, that we might never get loved. I'm never going to get daddy love. That just wasn't in my life. Father love wasn't something I ever get to get. And as soon as I learn how to grieve that, I will stop trying to parentify my partners in ways that are damaging and harmful to them and to our relationships. You see, like on that kind of level, my relationship with my mother is so complicated and traumatic. So my relationship with other older women and how I try to parentify them as mentors and teachers, and they're not my mothers. Right? Like, and we do this in all kinds of places in our lives. And it's dehumanized, it's just trauma bonding. And we need bonds of light and love and wellness as much as we can, even if it doesn't fully manifest in this lifetime, Michelle, that at least we're encoding it in our DNA for the next generations. Because our ancestors did. They taught us song and humming and art and dance and mutual aid. And you know what I mean? They taught us these things. That's why the impulse is there. These are not new things. These are ancestral rememberings. Oh, this is what we do to survive. You know? So it's our role in the next line of ancestors to encode us with this like trauma magic, accountability work. You know?
So much magic in what you offered today. So much. Like there's so many. I interviewed Vivette the other day and I said that you offered a whole string of pearls of wisdom. Like, I feel like that's what you're offering, and just memories, like what we need to remember about who we are, and what our work is, like, you know, outlining that for us. So I appreciate such an understatement. I use the word a lot because I do appreciate people, but I love you. And and just feel so moved every time we get to connect by what you offer and just who you are and your energy, right? And your words. And magic and spirit. And so I thank you for spending time with me today in this way.
I'm so grateful to you, Michelle. Like, I've learned so much from you. I mean, we connected so long ago, and then our paths just kind of diverged in this way. But I've loved watching you on your path, you know, and the magic of hearts everywhere. And yeah, I so appreciate resonance and feeling like, yeah, of course, this conversation, because you and I, we're on this web, we're thrumming this web, and it's so hopeful to me that I'm not crazy.
Right.
I'm not making these things up, because other people are also hearing these things and getting these downloads and all around us. And it gives me so much hope about women and the feminine divine. And you know, if I do die in that hospital bed without my people, and nobody can dress my body in oils, like if that were to happen, right? I've lived such a beautiful, like, what a gift to have lived this life and to have known people like you in my life, and to have had like intimate conversations of such deep connection and vulnerability in my life. Like, what a gift. What is the more I'm waiting for that I haven't already received? You know? So thank you too for that connection and space and medicine that you echo out into the world.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. My heart is so full. Yeah. Thanks, Marisol.
Thank you, Michelle.
You are your beating heart. Ready, crack open, wide open. So